Chapter 26. Hope. Having cancelled his classes for the rest of the day, the professor messaged Evan with an urgent request to join him in the cryonics lab. Then he rushed Rosa from the train down into the laboratory. As fast as he could, he hooked her up to the miniature life support machine and checked her carefully. She was dead. But there was no time to mourn. He had to act quickly if he wanted to preserve her body and brain for any future hope of life. Certain of her condition, he took her into the cryonics lab and began administering medications and antifreeze to cool her body as quickly as possible. Cryonics research had not yet discovered an effective way to restore a human back to life, but keeping Rosa frozen until an effective way was found was the only hope he had. Evan came rushing into the lighted lab and began helping. They had performed this procedure before on a few miniaturized animals that had died, in preparation for such an emergency. In silence, they focused on the necessary important steps until the tiny body was fully prepared. Finally, the professor placed Rosa inside the special sleeping bag, donned protective gloves, and lowered her into the vat of liquid nitrogen. Sadly, he turned to Evan and they embraced. With their arms around each other, they mourned the loss of their first mature tiny in a world where suffering was to be completely minimized. A death in paradise? Jack questioned, as tears rolled down his cheeks. Killed when they were just having fun? Oh, why did I put that bump on the hill? What happened, Jax? Evan begged, knowing nothing of the circumstances and having restrained himself from asking until now. The professor told him the whole tragic story. Evan was very distraught as tears ran down his face. Poor little Rosa, he cried. She's so young to lose her life in a freak accident. How could this happen? He grimaced. And the tinies witnessed all this? Satalors, they saw it all, Jax lamented, shaking his head. Who knows how they'll deal with this trauma? How do we tell them that Rosa is dead? Even Louis is hopeful that I can fix her up and send her back in. Many things were going through Evan's mind. The questions that Jax was asking were deep and difficult. He wasn't sure how to answer, but there was one thing he thought they should do. I think we should ban go-karting on the hill, he said. Thought of that, Jax Lemans replied dismally. But if we discontinue go-karting, we'll have to stop them from swimming in the lake. They are both equally dangerous. That would take away a lot of their fun. It would, he sighed heavily. But I do agree that losing one life is a tragedy. Regretfully, Evan said, we should have made the fun hill smaller. Perhaps, the professor fretted, or I shouldn't have added the bump. We simply wanted everyone to enjoy our world and develop their skills. But adding exciting adventures increases the risk of danger and sadness. The greater the excitement, the greater the potential for disaster, Evan agreed. The professor's phone rang. Louis was making a video call. Picking it up, the sad look on Louis's face was terribly distressing to both scientists. Is there any hope for Rosa? Was his first question. Agonized, the professor replied, Unfortunately, she is dead. Louis's face fell and he breathed heavily. I can't believe this has happened, he confessed. We are all in a lot of shock. This is the first time we have seen one of us die, and we're all trying to understand what it means. It is a terrible tragedy, the professor agreed as tears welled up in his eyes once again. We are in shock as well. Can you remake Rosa? Louis begged. One of the boys mentioned that if you gave Rosa life the first time, surely you can give her life again. Evan looked over at the professor curiously. He felt this was the time to admit that they couldn't give life. They could only rework a life that was already in existence. Rubbing his face with his hands, the professor hesitated. I've done everything I can, he assured Louis. There is hope that with some more experimentation and research, we may eventually find a way to restore life to the cells. But it won't be soon. It's not simple. But there is hope. You can tell the children there is hope that Rosa will come back to life one day. Evan wasn't so sure that cryonics was a substantial hope, but he didn't voice his skepticism with Louis still on the phone. The professor talked to Louis about how to counsel the tinies through this tragedy. The three of them grieved together. Jax admonished Louis that it was important to not suppress his sadness or that of the children. Keeping it bottled up inside will only lead to more hurt later, he said. They've got to talk it through whenever they feel like talking. When the professor had finished his conversation and put down his phone, Evan murmured, "I'll be more convinced of the merits of cryonics when they actually bring someone back to life." I know, the professor agreed thoughtfully, but it's all we can offer for now, and it may prove viable at some point in the future. What we are discovering in science today would have seemed preposterous 100 years ago or less. Perhaps you and I will discover the way to bring life back to the cells, he said, looking up with a smile. In the meantime, he reasoned, a false hope is better than no hope at all. It will help them all feel better. Evan had picked up on the words, bring life back. He frowned. But we didn't give life in the first place, he pointed out warily. That is beyond the ability of any scientist. True, the professor agreed. But I do believe that science will discover a way. It's just a matter of time. After his conversation in the library with Seth and the online debate that he had just watched, Evan was no longer sure what he believed. If Seth and the physicist were right, and there really was hard evidence to believe in a supernatural, all-powerful God, then life was a gift that only God could give. He shuddered at the thought of humans finding a way to generate life. It sounded like the plot for a scary sci-fi movie. Would it be wise, he pondered privately, for such incredible power to be in the hands of those who might use it for good, but may well use it for evil? Excusing himself from the lab to check on the tinies, Evan walked past the incubators below, with tiny new puppies and kittens developing inside. He was thankful they had decided not to create any more human beings. I must discourage Jax from developing any more humans, Evan told himself anxiously. This has been a fabulous experiment, but if there is even a remote chance that there is a great designer, what does he think of us modifying his creation and offering hope that we can't give? Agitated and distressed, Evan rode the elevator up to the paradise room. Does Seth's God offer any hope for life after death, he pondered, walking into the dark greenhouse structure. And if he does, is there any evidence to believe it is possible? Or do Christians just hope for something because it's better than no hope at all? As he walked across the room, he was surprised to see the dome was glowing softly. Gazing inside, he noticed that the solar twinkle lights had been turned on. The Beach Boys were not in their hammocks. Sad, muffled voices came over the speakers, but the voices didn't seem to be coming from the houses. He could see Uncle Louis walking across the shadowy meadow. A loud wail caught his attention. It sounded like it came from the meadow. "We can't sleep, Uncle Louis," Amy was crying. "Is Rosa okay?" Gazing across the field in the direction of her voice, Evan noticed that a large group of tinies were huddled together on Louis's cabin deck. He could only see shadowy figures, but it seemed that perhaps all of Paradise had decided that they couldn't sleep on their own. Uncle Louis reached the cabin and sat down beside them. A tall girl plunked herself in his lap and threw her arms around his neck. He could hear crying. There was movement on the deck as the others piled in close, and soon Louis was surrounded by all the distraught young teenagers. He could hear many of the girls sobbing. Lily was wailing. Uncle Louis seemed to be hugging them all. Other voices inquired about Rosa. Eventually Uncle Louis replied, his voice trembling. "Rosa isn't okay. She won't be coming back for a long time." "Is she dead?" "Yes," he replied softly. There were many sorrowful cries, even from the boys. When they had quieted back down, Louis continued kindly. "Professor hopes that with some more research, he will find a way to bring Rosa back to life, but it will take time." Gazing at the grief-stricken scene, Evan's heart bled compassion. Regardless of whether it's right or wrong, I'm in this so deep, I have to stay, he thought. These tinies are real people. I can't leave this project, especially not when things are going wrong. For a long while, Evan stood listening to Louis comforting the tinies. Gradually, the noises subsided, but no one left his cabin. When the professor finally joined Evan after cleaning up the lab, it was peaceful and quiet in Paradise, with only the odd snore here and there. "I think they've all fallen asleep on Louis's deck," Evan whispered. The professor peered into the dark shadows and smiled sadly. Louis is bearing the brunt of this once again, he admitted. I hope he gets some sleep tonight. I hope he can bear up, Evan agreed. What would we do without Louis? They both looked at each other and swallowed hard. There was no comforting answer to that question. We'd better go get some sleep too, the professor said sadly. There's not much left of the night. Chapter 27. Grieving. That night, the professor lay awake for ages, trying to think of something special he could send in to comfort the tinies. Finally, it came to him at 3 a.m. Satisfied, he drifted off to sleep. He woke up 4 hours later and headed back to the rainforest biome. Taking the drop floor entrance, he strode quickly to the greenhouse and picked up a newly germinated rose. It wasn't much more than a seedling with only 5 leaves. In the supply room, he made a small card and wrote a short message in his best writing. Tucking it in carefully with the requested supplies of bird food, pet food, oil, yeast, and flour, he also stuffed in a bag of Wonder Drink to fill the formula machine. He knew Nancy had been too distraught to make any bread. Sending the train in, he walked down the long corridor and through the elevator entrances to the Paradise Room. Evan was already there, peering inside. They nodded to one another. The tinies had also woken early, having had a restless night on the uncomfortable deck. Evan and the professor could see some of the young men were bringing big rocks from Mining Hill. With the widest carry carts, Odin, Ponzi, and Vahib were leading the group, pushing their loads along the stone road. All the other tinies stood by the school. Together the two scientists watched quietly as the young teens reached the schoolhouse and took out the stones to build a large pillar, equidistant between the school and the shoreline. Then all the tinies stood in a circle around it with their arms around each other. Zahir led the group in a goodbye song to Rosa, a simple, heartfelt lament that he must have composed during the night. Evan noticed that Amy didn't sing. Instead, she looked down at the ground the whole time, obviously trying to choke back sobs. She was in tears when he finished. Rosa is dead because of me, she burst out crying. I went too fast. I hit the bump. It's all my fault. Me too, Georgia wailed, coming over to put her arms around Amy. I rolled on top of her over and over. Damien came over as well. Well, I pushed her up the hill, he admitted with deep distress, putting his arms around the two sorrowful young ladies. I should have told her that if she couldn't climb, then she couldn't ride. Kenzie lamented, I shouldn't have asked to go from the top. For a few moments, Uncle Louis let them all comfort each other. He knew how important it was to show empathy and help the group heal. Finally, he gently asked, Did anyone intend to hurt Rosa? No, not at all, Amy protested tearfully. I was upset by her complaining, but I never planned to hurt her. Did you plan to roll on her? Uncle Louis asked Georgia. No, I couldn't stop myself. Uncle Louis looked at Damien. I was just trying to help her out, he said. Kenzie didn't wait for a look. I just wanted more fun. I believe you all, Uncle Louis told them. What happened on that hill was an accident. It wasn't planned by anyone. It was a mistake, a mishap. Certainly a tragedy, but it wasn't intentional. Sometimes bad things happen by accident. We can't blame ourselves as though we planned to hurt her. Rosa made a choice to go down the hill just like you all did, he continued. Life will be full of choices, and sometimes our choices may have disastrous consequences, and there will be no one to blame. Well, we can blame the professor for the dumb bump on the hill, Odin burst out sorrowfully with uncharacteristic emotion. Yeah, why was there a bump? Ponzi agreed. Hearing the boys' accusatory questions, the professor sighed deeply. Evan reached over and put his arm around him. Did the professor put the bump there to hurt people? Uncle Louis asked. Well, it sure was a dumb mistake if it wasn't intended, Odin argued, almost crying himself. On the other side of the glass, the professor agreed with Odin. Yes, it was, he whispered sadly. I made a very dumb mistake. Down beside the shore, Uncle Louis walked over and put his arm around Odin. We know it wasn't intended for harm, he assured him. Because the professor has shown us love in so many ways. Look how wonderful paradise is. Look all around you. All the tinies gazed sadly at their wonderful world. The huge, sparkling lake stocked with fish, the long, white, sandy beach, the prosperous gardens, the fruitful orchards, the forested hills. Would someone who has been so kind and done so much good for us, and who sends us everything we need on a daily basis, would he put things in paradise only to hurt us? Unprepared to concede the point, Odin just shrugged and pulled away. Looking at all the glum-faced teenagers, Uncle Louis reasoned, the bump could have added a lot of fun and increased our skill level once we were more experienced driving. It wasn't placed to harm us, but to give us pleasure. However, due to what happened yesterday, we will go ahead and remove that bump. He smiled at Kenzie, who looked eager to begin digging that moment. Wearily, and with forced optimism, Uncle Louis announced, I want you to all hold on to this little ray of hope. A little ray of hope for Rosa and for all of us. The professor is going to do all that he can to bring Rosa back to life. He says there is a way, it just takes time. Everyone cheered and clapped their hands. Outside the dome, Evan glanced quickly at the professor. There is? You will? He whispered. I didn't say it exactly like that, the professor frowned, keeping his eyes on the tinies, but I will definitely do some research. Shaking his head in disbelief, Evan glanced at his phone and mumbled, I should get going. I've got a group meeting this morning. But then he saw Amy put up her hand. Yes, Amy, Uncle Louis acknowledged. Do you think we could call that hill Rose's Hill? She pleaded, her voice full of emotion. Then it will always have a special memory of her. There were nods of approval all around. Rose's Hill, some of the girls shouted. I think that is a lovely idea, Amy, Uncle Louis agreed. But what happens when the next person dies? France queried. There aren't any more hills needing names. We will all be much more careful in the future, Uncle Louis said. Oh, and being careful will save us from anything bad, Odin sneered angrily. If we were more careful, it wouldn't have been so hot that one day. Or if we were more careful, a giant spider wouldn't have crept in. Uncle Louis knew Odin was hurting, but he was also weary and worn out from the devastating ordeal. Nothing he had said or done seemed to help Odin, and Uncle Louis felt he might respond angrily himself. The train came in, he replied bluntly. Let's see what gifts we were sent today. Zahir stood up and replied directly to Odin. Being careful will help a great deal, he argued. If we're careful to wash our hands, we won't get sick. If we're careful when we use sharp knives and saws, we won't hurt ourselves or others. If we're careful to listen to the advice Uncle Louis gives us, we can avoid situations that he knows could cause harm. He knows more than us. We have to do our part to keep paradise safe. Odin retorted fiercely. Oh yeah, well, being careful wouldn't have saved the girls from the spider, would it? You would have been too careful to help out. You likely would have run off and hid in the store. There were a few snickers among the beach boys. Not wanting to pursue an argument, Zahir turned away. Ponzi called out, Come on, Odin, let's go see if there's any food in the store. I'm starving. The mention of food sent many of the tinies hurrying towards the store. They had missed dinner the night before, and no one had made breakfast that morning. Still reeling from Odin's taunt, Zahir looked around for his dog, who was following a rabbit trail in the forest. Freddo hadn't eaten breakfast either. He called for him and waited for his dog to come. Uncle Louis walked over and put his arm around the young lad's shoulders. Thank you, Zahir, he said with relief. Thanks for speaking up. Zahir nodded. His dark skin was quite flushed. I believe you, Uncle Louis, he said. And I believe the professor will remake Rosa. We'll see her again, likely soon. On the other side of the glass, Evan turned to the professor with alarm. Hey, I didn't say when, the professor whispered. Evan just shook his head. Looking down at Zahir with deep affection, Jax remarked, What a special young man Zahir is becoming. He has real leadership potential. Let him have a little hope to hold on to. Again, Evan turned to leave. I sent in some wonder drink, the professor told his assistant as most of the tinies ran toward the store, and a note and gift. Evan's phone was vibrating with messages, but he left it in his pocket and stayed to see what would happen next. Kenzie reached the train first and discovered the special note. He opened it, skimmed through the message, and called out in astonishment, It's a card from the professor. Everyone hurried forward to see what the card would say. Please read it, Uncle Louis requested. Kenzie read, My dearest Tinies, I am so grieved that you have lost a precious friend in paradise. I am so sorry that the hill which I made for you to enjoy and the bump that I put in to give you some excitement has resulted in Rose's death. This was never my intention. I love you all and only want the best for everyone. If I can find a way to keep you all alive forever, I will do whatever it takes for that to happen. You will find a little rose in a container. It's a rose for Rosa. Please plant it in a special place for her. With much love and sorrow, the professor. All the tinies were comforted by the loving message. Vanitha and Yu Yan looked in the train and pulled out the container. We'll plant it, they offered. We'll put it right by Rose's pillar. I'll bring some good dirt, Odin offered, much to everyone's surprise. As much as you need. Turning to look at each other sadly, the professor and Evan understood that Odin, in his own unique way, was heartbroken over Rose's death. Louis will need to give him some counseling, the professor mused. Evan agreed, watching Zahir and Kenzie run off with shovels to remove the bump. They all need counseling, he said. We could use a whole team of counselors right now. Or Rachel Khalid, the professor added regretfully. If we can just get through a few more months. You'd really like her to be a part of this, wouldn't you? Evan smiled. I'm sure she'd have great insights, the professor nodded. She came from a family of 8. As much as they could see that all the tinies needed counseling, and as much as they told themselves that they loved all the tinies equally, there were some that tugged at their heartstrings more than others. Foremost in the professor's heart were the tinies who felt they had caused the accident and were openly displaying their grief. They were also the tinies most responsive to reason and affection. As Evan pulled out his phone to check his messages, the professor said, Maybe it's time to release the baby animals. But they've only just come out of incubators. They are still so fragile, Evan reminded him. I believe caring for baby animals will help the tinies heal and distract their minds from what has happened. We'll tell them what they need to do and send in the formula machines. It will also develop their nurturing potential and generate tamer animals. I suggest we give the babies 1 more week in the nursery, Evan stated, feeling the plan was rather risky. You don't want there to be more accidental deaths. We can tell Louis to let all the tinies know that the babies are coming. They can do some research during school hours, and those who want pets can get busy preparing for their care, which will distract their minds. Any that don't get adopted will nurture here in the nursery. Considering the matter carefully, the professor agreed. You're right, Evan. 1 more week is wise. I'll collect some helpful information and send it in on the train tomorrow. Even the anticipation of new pets will be helpful to take their minds off this great heartbreak. Evan's phone began ringing, and this time he rushed off to his meeting. Chapter 28. A Ping. Amy and Georgia were ecstatic when Uncle Louis told them about the new adoption plans. Babies? They blurted out happily, hugging each other on the school stairs. Who gets them? Charlie wanted to know. You can sign up right here, Uncle Louis said, holding up a piece of paper. These baby animals are so little that they will require a couple weeks of intensive care. You'll need to feed them every 2 or 3 hours, change their bedding, give them lots of love. Don't sign up unless you're prepared to dedicate yourself to the task. Almost every young lady rushed to the sign-up sheet. Lima and Franz had no interest. Odin and Ponzi were still asleep in bed, but the other guys were eager to be involved. While many of the young teens signed up for puppies or kittens, Charlie and Vahid wanted a calf and were willing to look after 40 more chickens for the farm. Eggs were an important commodity in paradise. Kenzie was eager to look after the lambs. Zahir chose the squirrels, Nancy picked rabbits, and Amy, Georgia, and Lily wanted pet birds. What kind of a bird? Damien asked as they left school that day to trade for lunch at the store. A lorikeet, Amy said. They are so pretty. I'm hoping it will want to sit on my shoulder. Cool, he replied. I'm getting a puppy, a golden puppy. I hope it will be just like Zahir's. The rest of that week, school focused on animal care and training. Charlie brought Maxie to all the lessons, and Zahir brought Fredo. Nancy would have liked her cat to join in, but Ripple kept returning to the forest. She preferred to spend her time stalking the squirrels. Cats aren't nearly as cooperative as dogs, Nancy had to concede. Uncle Louis was feeling quite tired that week, as almost every night a number of tinies would come to his cabin unable to sleep. Sitting with them in the dark on his couch, talking through the accident and the images they struggled to forget, was helpful counseling, but it was only a benefit for those who sought it out. Odin and a few of the others didn't seek help, and Uncle Louis was too weary to impose it upon them. Often the tinies would go back to their homes, but Amy, Georgia, Yuyan, and Lily often fell asleep cuddled up to him on the couch. Uncle Louis didn't sleep so well sitting up. With all the ongoing drama at night, it was helpful that the morning classes were on the easy topic of pet care and handling. He taught them how to train an animal to come when it was called, to praise it for good behavior, and let it know when it had misbehaved. They practiced on Charlie and Zahir's dogs. Time after time, Freddo responded much more quickly than Maxie. Freddo loved attention and would do anything for a little praise and tasty treats, especially Nancy's bread. Maxie was very distracted by smells and noises and not nearly so eager to please. On the last day of animal care classes, the Beach Boys invited everyone to come watch their first surfing show. They rushed off right after school was over to set up with Georgia and Kenzie. All the others followed Zahir and Vahid to wash their hands by the outhouse, and then they went to the store to trade for lunch. Lunch was a surprise. "Look, it's a little kitty," Vanitha cried out with delight, coming out of the store with her bread roll. Sure enough, Nancy had made the bread rolls look like a kitten face, pinching the dough to look like pointed ears with bits of fruit embedded for eyes and grass for whiskers. "That's so dumb," Ponzi complained when he and Odin showed up yawning. He handed in 3 small pretty rocks that he'd mined for a kitty bun. Odin had a flat rock. Everyone else was delighted with the cute faces. As usual, the teens found a place to sit on the store deck stairs to enjoy the bread. Water was always free, but those with extra supplies to trade often picked up Amy's freshly squeezed orange juice instead. While everyone was still enjoying their kitty rolls, the cymbal clanged and the shakers could be heard, an indication that the Beach Boys were ready. "Showtime!" Amy called out to the other tinies. Charlie quickly passed around some fresh bananas to all the teenagers who had given an hour to help him weed the grass out of the garden. "I'm bringing the rest of the bananas to the show," he told Santa, picking up his half-full basket. "The trees are loaded." Amy had spent her lunchtime making soup in the store kitchen to give the Beach Boys. It was squash soup, and she had added apple to it for extra sweetness. She thought it was delicious. Putting it into a big glass jar, she screwed on the lid. Nancy dashed out ahead of her with 3 fresh kitty buns. Aside from Odin and Ponzi, all of Paradise turned out for the first surfing demonstration. The tinies placed their offerings in the bin that Zahir had built to hold the goods they received, and then sat down on the long pier. Dangling their legs in the cool water, they finished off their lunches. Amy sat down beside Georgia and Vahid. Zahir arrived soon after, but he didn't put anything in the bin. Uncle Louis had given him and Kenzie free passes to everything that week, since they had both worked so hard to remove the bump on the hill. It had taken 5 afternoons, but finally the job was done. Damien, Franz, and Lima sat on the end of the pier ready to begin. "Look at the balloon," Amy said, pointing in Damien's direction. "I wonder what he will do with it this time." Damien had attached a large round balloon to his surfboard using the fuzzy pipe cleaners. The bright red balloon was big and round, filled with air, and he was holding the closed end of it tightly. "Those guys are always coming up with something new," Zahir replied. "And I know how they blow it up so big." "Really?" Amy asked, very attentive. "I'll show you sometime," Zahir told her. "I saw them holding a balloon over the breeze holes at the edge of Paradise." Damien signaled it was time to begin. Kenzie clanged his cymbals together, and Georgia shook the shakers extra hard, and the show began. While Lima and Franz plunged into the water on their boards to swim out to the waves, Damien stood up on his and loosened his hold on the end of the balloon. Immediately, with a sharp, spluttering noise, the balloon propelled him across the water far ahead of his friends. He zipped across the lake as though he was riding a go-kart down the hill. When the balloon fizzled out, Damien caught a wave and rode it into shore. Everyone was clapping and cheering for Damien as he picked up his board and ran back into the water. He began swimming out to the big waves while Lima and Fran stood up on their boards. Far out in the deep water, they had something new to perform as well. Instead of just riding waves like they normally did, they pulled off a few flips. Franz was only able to do one and then went face first into the water. But the audience enjoyed the mistakes almost as much as the perfectly performed flips. Lima managed to do 2. As the boys were swimming out for one more demonstration, Amy heard a distant ping. She and Charlie turned to look toward the North Forest. Ha, it's just Odin and Ponzi fooling around, Kenzie muttered. I've never heard a ping before, Amy worried. Zahir agreed. Want to go investigate, he asked. Okay, she nodded, as soon as the show was over. Everyone stayed till the end of the surfing show and clapped enthusiastically when it was done. The Beach Boys were getting better and better at their stunts. When the applause began to die down, Amy and Zahir raced off in the direction of the noise. It wasn't often that Amy or any of the other Tawnies ventured near Odin and Ponzi's hideout. Amy stopped quickly when she saw a big, round object dangling from a tree. It had 8 skinny legs. She let out a cry of surprise. Zahir laughed and poked it with his finger. Made from black pipe cleaners, it twirled around on a string, but it had no other reaction. He reached out and slapped it hard. Don't worry, he smiled as it swung back and forth. It's just a fake spider. They could hear Odin and Ponzi discussing how to make the pebbles shoot further. Zahir ran through the woods and Amy followed him slowly, trying to avoid other black, dangling creatures. Fake or not, they were creepy looking. What are you guys up to? She heard Zahir ask. Did you hear that last one? Odin laughed. That was our best yet. Amy caught up to Zahir. Did you hit something? She questioned the gloating experimenters. Maybe, Ponzi chuckled. If we did, it was something up there. He pointed in a sideways, upward fashion. Amy looked at the pot the young teens were using. They had given Vanitha rocks for her garden in exchange for a custom-ordered pot. The large clay jar in front of Ponzi was very wide at the bottom with only a small opening at the top. Ponzi was holding a lid on the jar. Zahir tried to get closer to see what exactly the guys were blasting into the air, but Odin stopped him. Top secret stuff going on here, he said. No one is allowed to see what we're doing. Does Uncle Louis know about this? Amy asked. He's the one that taught us about chemical combinations, Ponzi smirked, his bronze face glowing. We're just doing our own science experiments. The professor keeps sending in the supplies. Now get yourselves somewhere else, Odin demanded. This is private property. Paradise doesn't have private property, Zahir reminded him. Well, I do, Odin told him. We don't want to endanger anyone else, Ponzi piped up with a comical grin. We're doing some testing here and it could be dangerous to other tinies. It stings if it gets on your skin. He spoke firmly. So we're going to have to ask you to leave before we let the next one off. Uncle Louis needs to know about this, Amy frowned. See if I care, Odin taunted. Zahir took Amy's hand and pulled her away with him. No sooner were they out of the trees when they heard laughter and another ping. Turning around quickly, Amy whispered to Zahir, Let's go see if something fell. Running back into the woods, they scoured the ground for unusual objects, keeping a safe distance away from Odin and Ponzi's worksite. As they diligently searched the forest for anything that might explain the noise, they could hear Odin and Ponzi boasting about their experiments. Those pebbles were great, Odin said. We are definitely hitting something, Ponzi agreed. I love the ping. If there really is a professor, we'll see if he hears it, Odin chuckled. Maybe he'll show his face. I doubt we'll see him, Ponzi argued. Evan maybe, but not the professor. Let's try and do one more before Louis comes to shut us down, Odin urged. Got to do as much damage as we can while we still have a chance. If we do something big, the professor will have to come and fix it. Heh, Ponzi snickered. Then we'll see if he's real or not. He held up a handful of stones. We have 5 more pebbles. Want to put in 3 at once? Nah, let's do all 5. Louis will be here any minute. With a look of alarm, Amy glanced up at Zahir. He looked back with concern. Let's go, he mouthed. Trying to escape from the forest without a noise, Amy and Zahir slid under the trees and hightailed it toward Uncle Louis's house. They hoped Uncle Louis would be there. Banging on the door of his single-story wooden house, they soon determined no one was home. They raced to the store. But Nancy and Milan didn't know where he was and were busy preparing spinach and tomato quiche for everyone's dinner that night. Following the stone road down to the lake, they came across Charlie, Santa, and Kenzie, who were working in the garden picking fruit, but no one had seen Uncle Louis. They checked the beach without success. They even checked the outhouse. Finally, Amy suggested climbing Rainbow Hill where they could see all around. Uncle Louis was coming down the pathway as they ran up. "You both look worried," he observed. "Is everything okay?" "Have you heard the pings?" Amy asked. "They're coming from the North Forest." "No," he said, frowning. "Are Odin and Ponzi at it again?" Amy nodded frantically. "They are planning to do another one with 5 pebbles this time," Zahir relayed. 5 pebbles? Is that what they're using? Without another word, Uncle Louis started running toward the forest. Amy and Zahir followed. "They want to do damage," Amy called out as they dashed down the hill and across the meadow. "I heard them say that. They want to see if the professor will come and fix it." "This is serious," Uncle Louis said. "We have to stop them." As the 3 of them came around Rose's Hill, they heard a succession of pings. "They are hitting something for sure," Uncle Louis stated angrily. "What are they thinking?" Marching into the woods, Uncle Louis met the boys as they were quickly closing up their jars of supplies. "Do you have any idea of what you're doing?" he confronted them angrily. No one had ever seen Uncle Louis so angry before. "We're just experimenting," Odin said proudly. Suddenly, Amy spotted a pebble lying nearby. She picked it up. "With these?" she asked. "We want to see just how far we can shoot the pebbles," Ponzi smiled. "When we hear one hit something, we know we've had good success." Uncle Louis was furious, but he didn't want to say or do anything that might betray the professor's ideals for paradise. He decided he needed time to think and confer with the professor. "Both of you are coming with me," he fumed. "I'm not sure what to do with either of you, but for now you have lost your freedom. You will be kept under my supervision." As they walked out of the forest, Uncle Louis wasn't sure how he would keep an eye on the reckless young men and manage to get to the control cave to talk to the professor, but somehow he knew he was going to have to pull it off. Rain began falling from the sky. Generally, rain only fell at night, and there was a strange, muffled beeping sound that echoed in the distance. All of them looked up in surprise. Uncle Louis had never heard the noise before, but at the moment, his attention was fully on the troublemakers. "Zahir," Uncle Louis said, turning to him with a red face, "can you please gather all those supplies and take them back to the store? Tell Nancy she is not allowed to trade these chemicals for anything or to anyone unless she asks my permission first." Then he added sharply, "Have them locked away in a secret place." Amy and Zahir exchanged anxious glances as they ran to get carry carts to transport the supplies. They knew the situation must be serious for Uncle Louis to take away freedom and lock up supplies. Chapter 29. Something is not right. Uncle Louis kept the troublemakers busy for the next hour until the sun went down. He had not been planning to put a rock patio around his house, but it seemed the perfect make-work project for 2 foolish young men, even if it was raining hard. Never allowing Odin or Ponzi out of his sight, Uncle Louis followed them as they dug for rocks in the hill and marched behind them as they wheeled the cart back to his house by the store. He talked to them about responsibility, thinking of others, and that the greatest joy in life is found in serving others, not in being served. While he was working with the wayward experimenters, the other tinies enjoyed the steady rain. Daytime rain was a welcome novelty. Cascading Mountain was sending down a fabulous waterfall, and many had discovered that if they put their boats in the river, right near the falls, they could get a fast ride to the lake. It was a little bit dangerous as they had to duck down to get under the bridge, but it was fun. Water was beginning to pool in the low-lying areas, and Zahir, Kenzie, and Vahid were racing their go-karts down Rose's Hill. Large puddles sprayed in all directions when they zipped through to the tracks. Uncle Louis was pleased to see the other tinies were enjoying themselves. "No fair," Odin complained. "They get to have fun in this rain and we have to work in it." "There are consequences to acting irresponsibly," Uncle Louis stated firmly. "This is what it's like to lose the freedom to do as you please." Dinner time came and went, and the rain continued, and the muffled noise was a steady annoyance. Now that it was dark, an odd red glow blinked on and off in the hazy glazed horizons of paradise. "I really must ask the professor about that noise," Louis said to himself. "It seems rather strange. Maybe the professor is doing something unusual on his side." Once it was dark and the go-karting was over, Uncle Louis allowed Odin and Poncy to have dinner. Nancy and Milan were busy cleaning up the kitchen. He asked Zahir, Kenzie, and Vahid to supervise the reckless teenagers while they ate, and then Uncle Louis excused himself. "I must talk to the professor about that noise," he said. "I will be right back." The river was too swollen to cross, so Uncle Louis ran around the mountain. Behind the mountain, he saw something he'd never seen before. Attached to the perimeter of the dome, little fountains of water were spraying out in every direction. It was a forceful spray that hurt when it hit him. "Does this happen every time it rains?" he wondered. He had never walked in behind the hills when it rained at night, as generally he was sound asleep in bed. Ducking under the fountains and sloshing through the water, Uncle Louis's concern grew exponentially. When he got to the cave, he had to cross a stream to reach the door. "If this rain doesn't stop soon," he thought, "the cave will be flooded." Knowing a little bit about electricity, Uncle Louis was certain that would be a big problem. Quickly, he ducked inside and closed the door. He tried to video call the professor, but with no success. He tried 3 times in a row, but there was no answer. "He must be busy," he thought. "After all, it is dinner time." Deciding to text his message, he typed in, "Poncy and Odin were experimenting with baking soda and vinegar again, only they've now discovered they can restrict the reaction and project pebbles into the air. We all heard numerous pings. Apparently, they were hoping to cause damage to see if you would appear to fix the problem. Since then, we've been getting heavy rain, and I just noticed that fountains of water are spraying all around the perimeter. Is that normal? There is also a distant beeping noise that I've never heard before and a flashing red glow. The water is getting quite deep, and I'm worried the cave may soon be flooded. I would highly recommend turning off the rain. I hope you get this message soon. I am trying to keep a close eye on Odin and Poncy, so I may not have another chance to get back to the cave." Trying one more video call, Louis was disappointed that there was still no answer. Could be teaching, or at a conference, or maybe just talking to someone else, he speculated. Patiently, he waited a few more minutes to see if there would be a texted reply. There was nothing. "Oh well," he thought, "I've got to get back and keep everyone safe. I'm sure the professor will look at his phone soon enough." When he opened the cave door, he stepped back quickly in alarm as a stream of water poured into his office. "This is not good," he thought, quickly exiting and slamming the door behind him. "We need this rain to stop." Then it occurred to him that he could message Evan. Glancing down at the water, which was now past his ankles, he decided not to risk opening the door again. "The professor will get my message," he assured himself. "Surely he won't be distracted for much longer." Ducking under the fountain sprayers and sloshing through waist-deep puddles in the low-lying areas, Uncle Louis was well drenched when he returned to the store. In the dark, he could faintly make out 7 black figures sitting on the deck under the veranda. In the dim moonlight, Zahir and Kenzie could tell that Uncle Louis was still worried. "What's wrong?" they asked. "There's been far too much rain," Uncle Louis replied. "It needs to end soon." "Did you talk to the professor?" Odin taunted. "Was he there, looking in the window?" "Did he hear the pings?" Poncy giggled. Not wanting to cause any concern about the professor's absence, Uncle Louis didn't reply. He turned to Zahir, Kenzie, and Vahid. "Guys," he said calmly, "I think it would be a good idea to get the boats and bring them over to the farmland." There was silence. In the dim lighting, Uncle Louis could faintly see their look of surprise. "Won't the rain stop soon?" Nancy asked timidly. "I hope so," Uncle Louis told her flatly. "The farmland is the lowest lying area," he explained. "I'm concerned that if this rain continues, we may need to get everyone to higher ground." Kenzie asked, "Why won't the professor stop this rain when we've had enough?" Odin chuckled. "Didn't you tell him that we have lakes and rivers everywhere?" In anger, Uncle Louis said, "I'm not exactly sure what is going on, but for some reason, the water levels are rising dangerously and it's continuing to rain." "Could those pebbles have hit something important?" Zahir queried. Uncle Louis frowned. He considered Zahir's suggestion. "This rain began after the last round of pebbles, didn't it?" Odin chuckled. Poncy looked surprised. Kenzie and Vahid shared an anxious glance. "Round of pebbles?" Nancy echoed. "Did you cause this, Odin?" Certainly didn't mean to, Odin waffled. I don't know how to make it rain. Standing on the deck, Uncle Louis turned and looked towards the swollen, raging river that was overflowing the gardens and running to the lake. The water was creeping up the small hill on which the store stood and had surrounded his cabin completely. He could still faintly hear the steady, annoying beeping sound. He wondered how many tinies were already asleep in bed. I think we may have an emergency, he announced fearfully. I'm going to need all your help to keep everyone safe. Zahir and Kenzie jumped to their feet. What can we do? They asked. Taking charge, Uncle Louis planned their strategy. You both run in behind Cascading Mountain and find your way to Rainbow Hill, he told them. Turn on the twinkle lights. Being able to see will be of great assistance to everyone. Then make sure everyone is awake on the hill. Tell the girls to stay safe where they are. Run down to the lake and make sure all the beach boys are accounted for. Grab all the boats. We need at least 3 or 4 of you to bring the boats over to the farmland. We've got to get the animals and everyone in the low areas up on top of Mining Hill. Dashing off, Kenzie and Zahir plowed through the water that was creeping up the small hill. They headed toward the backside of Cascading Mountain. Should I go as well? Vahid offered. You come with me, Uncle Louis told him. The rest of us will get over to the farmlands and begin the evacuation. But I'm so tired, Odin complained, stretching on the deck. This is bedtime. You wanted to cause damage, Uncle Louis reminded him angrily, and you were hoping someone else would fix things up. Well, Odin, tonight you will be helping minimize the damage. You are coming with me. I'll find Ripple, Nancy cried out, jumping to her feet. Milan leapt to his as well. Get the cat, Uncle Louis nodded, and meet us on Mining Hill. Ponzi stood up. How will we get over there? He asked anxiously. I can't swim. Odin was still lying on the deck. Odin, get up now, Uncle Louis yelled loudly, or you won't eat all day or the next. Odin slowly sat up and looked around. With mounting fear, he moaned, We could all drown. I don't know how to swim either. Shaking his head, Uncle Louis realized that he should have insisted that all the tinies learn to swim, regardless of whether or not they enjoyed the lake. Watching the water rise and the river rage, he wished he had made the effort to become a confident swimmer himself. We won't be crossing the river, he assured Odin and Ponzi. We can make it to the farmland, he encouraged. It's not that far away. There was no time for hesitancy, and Vahid was already plunging in. Stepping into the standing water, Uncle Louis was relieved to find it was only up to his chest. Come on, you can walk across, he begged. We have to do this quickly. Taking hold of the reluctant teen's hands, Uncle Louis dragged them across to the other side. Oh, wake up the guys, Vahid called back as he headed to the farmhouse. Thanks, Uncle Louis yelled back. We'll get the girls. Once they had crossed the deep troughs of water, they ran up the gentle slope to the girls' home. In the distance, Uncle Louis could hear Vahid calling out to all the farmers. Brownie the cow was moving. The sheep were bleating pitifully, and even the hens were cackling in distress. Uncle Louis led Odin and Ponzi to the door of the orchard girls' home. They knocked loudly and yelled out their names. Vanitha came to the window. What's the matter? She asked sleepily. We're being flooded, Uncle Louis called out. Everyone needs to get up on top of Mining Hill, and we need to fetch the animals. Vanitha ran around waking up her friends. In a few moments, the girls came running out, dressed and yawning. Why isn't the professor turning off the rain? Tina inquired. Something has gone wrong, Uncle Louis informed her. For now, we just need to get everyone to safety. Hopefully the rain will stop soon. Sometimes the professor really doesn't know what's going on, does he? Odin smirked. Remember when we all had to sit in the lake because it got too hot? Yeah, Ponzi agreed. That took forever to fix. The girls looked over in distress. They remembered the hot day. What if he doesn't notice till the morning? Yu Yan called out. Vanitha's large eyes opened wider. We could all drown, she cried out in dismay. Yu Yan burst into tears. We have high hills, Uncle Louis assured the girls, reaching out to give them hugs. It would take days of rain before the hills would be covered. Yet he wasn't entirely sure how long it would take. The water was rising fast. Turning to the boys, he spoke sharply. Odin and Ponzi, go and find Brownie the cow. It's your job to get her up the hill. It might be helpful to put a rope around her neck, but you'll have to find one. When you get her up the hill, you can wait for the rest of us. Don't stop till your job is done. Grumbling and complaining, they wandered off to find the cow. Suddenly, the twinkle lights on Rainbow Hill lit up. Still holding the fearful girls close, Uncle Louis was thankful that someone had turned on the switch and that they could all see so much better. However, his relief was short-lived. He could now see the enormity of the situation. The amount of water rushing through the meadow to the lake was alarming. As he was glancing back toward the store, he saw his house lurch forward and quickly sail off to the river. This is very, very serious, he thought to himself. With all the challenges they had been through in the first 4 months, he had never felt more abandoned and alone. Never had he seen destruction on this level. All their lives were in danger. In his mind, he pleaded silently, "Please, Professor, look at your phone." "What should we do?" Tina asked. Turning to the girls in a state of shock, Uncle Louis encouraged them to get the sheep and herd them up Mining Hill. "There are enough farmers to handle the rest of the animals," he told them. "I want you all to be safe. Just worry about the sheep." Wanting to do their part, the girls ran to get the bleeding sheep out of their fenced enclosure. Uncle Louis ran down towards the farmhouse. Water was pouring into the windows. It was past his waist. Charlie and the farm boys were already outside, struggling to open the hen house as the water was halfway up the door. "Let's rip off the roof," Uncle Louis said, reaching up, hoping to pull himself on top. Vahid pulled himself up easily. Then he extended his hand to help Uncle Louis. Charlie was holding onto the door handle, trying not to float away. Being shorter, the water came to his armpits. Vahid pulled Charlie up. Once they were all on top, the three of them worked together trying to pull off a chunk of the roof, but it was quite secure. Brownie the cow was huddled behind the henhouse, surrounded by water and mooing over and over. Odin and Ponzi were not having any success in coaxing her to move. "How can we find a rope?" Odin yelled. "There's one in the henhouse," Charlie called out. "Help us get this roof off." With Odin's help, a corner of the roof broke off. The others lowered Charlie down into the gaping hole. "Everyone is floating in here," he called out. "Poor little chickens." Charlie handed up the rope, which was passed to Odin, and then they began hauling the chickens out of the house. Ponzi and Odin strained heavily to move Brownie. "Come on," Odin roared. "We're trying to help you, you stubborn, foolish animal." "Talk nicely to Brownie," Vahid called out. "She's scared." Charlie's dog swam through the water and nipped at Brownie's hindquarters, coaxing her to move. It was then that Uncle Louis saw 4 young men coming across the water toward them. Damien was leading the way on his surfboard. Zahir and Kenzie were in the Red Bird, and Lima was paddling the Beach Boys' boat. "Just in time," Uncle Louis said with relief. "We're going to need those boats." Odin and Ponzi heaved and managed to pull Brownie away from the henhouse as Maxie continued to nip at her rear end. No sooner had she moved away when Uncle Louis felt the henhouse lurch forward. "Oh no," he shouted as he felt the house began to move toward the river. Vahid looked at him anxiously. The chickens began to squawk and flap about. Fearfully, Charlie reached up and the others pulled him onto the roof. "Hang on," Damien encouraged as the henhouse drifted toward the raging river. "Let's stop them, guys!" Damien and the others in the boats paddled as hard as they could, attempting to steer their vehicles toward the floating house. "Get ready for a collision," Uncle Louis warned as he held firmly to the hole in the roof. The others did the same. When the house struck the boats, the chickens flew up into the air, but the young men held firm. "Be quick," Uncle Louis yelled. "Charlie first." Charlie grabbed a chicken and Vahid lowered him into Zahir's boat. Then they tried to grab more chickens while the house lurched back and forth, and they were all in great danger of falling off. Maxie had come back for her master and was swimming near Zahir's boat. Damien grabbed her while the others grabbed the chickens. Then the house lurched forward again, and Vahid was tossed into the water. Seeing that the house was heading for the river, Uncle Louis jumped in after him. Vahid wasn't a confident swimmer and began to panic. Uncle Louis could only do a basic dog paddle, but he managed to grab the back of Vahid's shirt and pull him toward Lima. The henhouse slammed into the stone bridge and was dashed to pieces. Rowing hard against the currents with both arms, Lima wasn't able to extend a hand to help anyone get on board. There was a desperate look on his face as he tried to keep his boat near the swimmers. Zahir and Kenzie were rowing hard to get their passengers to the hill. Damien was struggling to hold on to Maxie and move his surfboard forward. Maxie wanted to be with her master. With all his might, Uncle Louis dragged Vahid toward the boat. He was fearful that Lima would give up rowing and be swept to the lake. The bridge was now a dangerous obstacle that no one wanted to hit. Desperate to get out of the water, Vahid reached out for the boat. He caught the edge and pulled hard. Uncle Louis grabbed the boat as well. Both of them dragged themselves on board. There was no time to catch their breath. Lima needed help. Vahid grabbed the spare building board and began to paddle. Slowly, ever so slowly, they moved forward. Suddenly, Maxie plunged into the water to swim to Charlie. However, the current had become too strong, and the little dog was immediately pulled in the opposite direction. "Come back, Maxie!" Damien yelled, paddling wildly with his arms to fight the raging water and race after the dog. The others watched in horror as the current overpowered Damien. Losing the fight, he and Maxie were quickly drawn toward the river and the dangerous bridge. Chapter 30. A Nightmare. Tossing and turning, the professor was having a nightmare. It was all too real, a dream that often haunted him in the middle of the night. He was watching planes take off into the sky. He saw the aircraft taxi down the runway and get ready for takeoff. His pregnant wife Wendy was on board. She was heading out to visit her family in Newfoundland. The jet engines roared. Then the plane whirred down the runway and rose smoothly into the air. With a smile, he waved in the parking lot, even though he knew that his wife couldn't see him. He stood gazing upward, and then there was an explosion. Fire and thick black smoke belched out from the jet engine. The plane was thrown off course, nosediving toward the highway below. He heard screams from people nearby, brakes screeching on the road, crashes, more explosions, and then the blackest cloud rose silently into the air. Sweating, his heart pounding and breathing quickly, the professor sat up calling, "Wendy! Wendy!" But he wasn't at the airport. He wasn't even in his bed. He was alone in his living room, sitting upright on the couch. Jumping to his feet, he turned on a light and walked around the room, making sure he was fully awake. "Sa allures, will I never stop having this nightmare?" he asked himself. He didn't want the dream to reoccur. He looked for his phone, hoping there might be some messages that would provide a distraction. It wasn't on the coffee table. Mystified, he checked the couch, even lifting the cushions to see if it had slipped in behind. It wasn't there. "What have I done with my phone?" he fretted. Running over to the hall where his lab coat hung on the stand, he was greatly relieved to find the phone in his right coat pocket. "Whew," he said, "I can't be without this." He touched the side button, but it didn't turn on. He tried a few more times before he realized his phone was dead. "Oh la la," he exclaimed, and then he thought over his usage. "I guess I had a few video calls yesterday with the relatives, and there was that cryonics article I was trying to read. Maybe I just need a new battery. It's been running out far too fast lately." Walking into his bedroom, he plugged his phone into the charger. It took a few seconds before the battery icon showed up. It was at 0%. "This'll take a while," he muttered, coming into the kitchen for a snack. Finding some potato chips, he sat down and turned on his TV. There wasn't much on at 3 a.m. of December 26th, but he scanned through the options. "No wonder I had such a quiet evening. No phone," he grimaced. After attending a lovely Christmas dinner for the biosphere staff held in the Arctic biome, he had come home late and viewed some old videos. He had watched his wedding video with tears in his eyes, reminisced about their trips to India, Africa, and the Philippines, and even looked at the video they had shared with his in-laws, announcing their first successful IVF pregnancy. It had all been a bit much, stirring up past memories of happier days. Still, he wondered how he didn't realize his phone was missing. Flipping through the TV channels, he tried to recall the day's events. He talked to Wendy's parents for nearly an hour at 8. Then Aunt Claudette. "And I read that article as soon as I sat down at my desk," he remembered. "I did receive a message around 10, just before I headed out to the Arctic biome. Well, that's the last communication, I think." A newsflash caught his eye. A record-setting earthquake had struck California, triggering a massive tsunami. As he watched terrible scenes of boats and cars being smashed up against hotel resorts and people fleeing for their lives, he shuddered in horror. "C'est affreux! How can terrible things happen like this on Christmas Day?" he raged. "All those poor people were just trying to enjoy their family vacations." As the news reporters struggled to make sense of the catastrophe, agonizing over the estimated loss of life, they interviewed an Australian scientist. Professor Lemans was surprised when the expert attempted to portray plate tectonics as an essential element of a living planet, regulating the temperatures on Earth and moderating levels of carbon dioxide. As the scientist delved into the life-sustaining benefits of subduction, the professor shook his head angrily. "This is not the time to make a case for a senseless tragedy," he exclaimed. Suddenly, he heard a strange noise coming from his room. Dashing back into his bedroom, he saw a warning light flashing on the phone screen and heard a piercing alarm. For a moment or two, he was befuddled. He was certain he had never seen this particular alarm before. Looking carefully, he read the words, "Paradise Fire Alarm." Aghast, the professor reeled unsteadily on his feet. Swallowing hard, he turned a ghostly white, realizing the emergency had to be taking place in the Paradise Room or the dome. Immediately, he imagined terrifying scenes. "How long has this been going on?" he wondered fearfully. "Has Evan responded? He must be getting the same alarm." The fire alarm system in the dome was not linked to any public fire department. Since Paradise was still a secret operation, he hadn't wanted to alert the public over an emergency he was confident would never happen. He was certain that he and Evan would be able to handle anything on their own. "What has happened?" he asked himself over and over as he grabbed his keys from the counter and rushed for his car. At the last minute, he dashed back in to pick up his phone. Without the phone app, he would be unable to use the drop floor, which was the fastest way in. "I'll charge it in the car," he thought. Racing outside in the middle of a snowstorm, the professor climbed into his cold Toyota SUV. He plugged in his phone. In the wee hours of the morning, on one of the most important holidays, there were very few vehicles on the road. He made it quickly to the biosphere. Racing into the parking lot, the professor noticed that Evan's car wasn't there. He spun out in the freshly fallen snow. With no other cars to collide into, he pulled out of the spin, parked safely, and dashed into the biosphere. Swiping his security card, he entered the large glass doors and ran down the halls. He hit the green icon on his phone and dropped into the secret chamber. He fumbled the code in the dark tunnel, taking 2 tries before 0-suffering-66 was entered correctly. Then he sprinted between the locked doors. As he ran through the underground lab, he could hear the distant echo of the fire alarm, but he couldn't smell smoke. Riding the elevator up, the doors slid open. The red warning light was flashing on the wall, and the alarm was blasting noisily. "Sure hope there wasn't a fire," he fretted, dashing to the dome. "Please let it be a false alarm. Where is Evan?" Tiny lights lit up Paradise. He peered inside and saw the heavy flooding. The rainmaker was running back and forth, letting down a spray of water at the highest intensity. All the sprinklers were running full blast. The whole system was performing well in fire response mode, but he didn't see any evidence of a fire. "Satalors, this has been going on for a long while," he deduced, looking around anxiously for the tinies. He saw small groups on the hills and hoped they were all accounted for. Then he dashed toward the wall and hit the black emergency reset button. The alarm ceased, the flashing lights stopped, the sprinklers turned off, and the rainmaker slid down into place next to the oxygenator. Even though it was the middle of the night, he picked up his phone and called Evan. There was no answer. He called him a second time and left a message. Then he sent a text. "Are you getting the alarm? We've had a major flood in Paradise," he typed. "I think everyone is safe. Please come in as soon as you can." Breathing heavily and afraid of what he might see, the professor ran fearfully back over to the dome. "Thank goodness they've turned on the twinkle lights," he said to himself. In the middle of the churning water, he could see the boats full of chickens and tinies. The young men were straining to paddle toward the hills. Swift motion caught his eye, and he looked over to see Damien desperately holding onto his surfboard as he was swept through the torrents. "He's reaching for something," the professor said to himself. "What is it?" Then he noticed the little beagle trying to keep her head above the water. "Oh la la, poor Maxie," he whispered. Transfixed, he watched as Damien reached out to pull the dog back onto his board. He had almost grabbed her tail when she was pulled under by the rapids. Suddenly, the professor noticed the stone bridge was sticking up above the water. It was right in Damien's path. Before he had time to wonder what might happen, Damien hit the bridge and flew up into the air. His surfboard went one direction and Damien went the other. There was a long pause as the professor waited, desperately hoping the young surfer was okay. Finally, to his great relief, Damien popped back up. Stretching out his strong arms, he swam toward Uncle Louis's house, which was floating in the lake. When he climbed aboard safely, the professor gave a long sigh of relief. However, Charlie's dog failed to resurface. Seeing the 2 boats had made it safely to Mining Hill, the professor looked around for the other tinies. He counted everyone that he could see on both hills. Aside from Damien, they had all made it to land. The occupants of the boats were climbing out and straggling up to higher ground with all the chickens. I'm so thankful, he said, holding his hand to his heart. If I hadn't woken up, this could have been far, far worse. Quickly surveying the flooded dome, he saw the school and the store were completely submerged. I need to open the drain, he told himself. Everyone is safe on the hills now, and Damien is floating in the lake. The drain will take the water down slowly in the farmland. He should be okay. Running over to his desk, the professor wiggled his mouse to wake up the computer. He entered his password and put in the code to open the drain under the cliff. A gurgling sound indicated the command had taken place. Now that the rainmaker had stopped and everyone had reached a place of safety, the tinies huddled together. Drenched and shivering, they had no way to dry off. "Huh, you figured it out, finally," Odin was grumbling. "Sure took 'em long enough." The professor was pleased to hear Uncle Louis's response. "Your foolishness started this, Odin. I don't know what you guys hit, but you damaged something. We could have lost lives tonight. Don't ever assume that you will be saved out of every reckless action that you take. I don't want to hear anything but thankfulness from you." "They hit something?" the professor pondered. With dismay, he realized that Louis must have told him about it. Taking his phone out of his pocket, he checked his messages. Sure enough, a descriptive text had come through around 6:30 in the evening. "Oh la la, that was almost 10 hours ago," he calculated. Clapping his hand to his forehead, he berated himself for being so distracted. Evan came rushing through the door, just as the professor had finished reading the message. The young man's face was filled with dread. "Everyone is alive," the professor assured him in a hushed tone. "Thanks for coming right away." Peering into the dome, Evan was horrified. "It's a complete flood," he whispered harshly. "This is terrible. They could have been killed. What happened?" Relaying Louis's message, Jax told him, "Apparently, Ponce and Odin were experimenting with the baking soda and vinegar. They discovered how to project pebbles into the air and were hoping to cause some damage." "What fools!" Evan breathed angrily. "Why would they ever want to damage the world?" "Apparently, they wanted to see what I would do." Shaking his head, Evan was in shock. "I'm guessing they must have hit a sensor and caused it to malfunction," the professor deduced softly. "Something caused the sensor to set off the fire alarm system." "But you would have heard the alarm," Evan questioned, trying to put all the details together. "And I should have. My phone was on vibrate. I was at a party. Anyway, no excuses. I can't believe I missed it." The professor admitted his own neglect of the phone and the quiet evening he had enjoyed after the staff dinner. Evan listened in disbelief as the professor recalled the details, keeping his voice low. "We failed them tonight," he confessed bitterly. "Even though we were both linked into our fail-proof system, we let them down." "We're so human," Evan agonized, covering his face with his hands. "I'm thankful I'm not in charge of the world." Tossing his arms up in the air, he whispered loudly, "Paradise is an enormous responsibility." "Everyone is still alive," the professor reminded him. Turning his attention to the tinies, Evan counted those he could see. "There are 13 shivering tinies on Mining Hill," he remarked anxiously. "One tiny is floating on debris in the lake. Where are the others?" The professor looked in. Rainbow Hill was deserted. "Well, they were all standing on the clearing when I came in," he mused softly. "I suppose if I lived on the hill, I'd be very tempted to get out of my wet clothes and go back to bed." "I wish we could drop in some blankets on Mining Hill," Evan whispered. There were no houses on Mining Hill. "I could turn up the heat," the professor suggested, running over to his desk to fiddle with the controls. Making his way around to the west side, Evan suddenly pointed to the lake. "Two tinies are in a boat," he said softly. "I'd say they are heading out to rescue Damien." "Really?" the professor whispered, looking up with a pleased expression. "I'd say it's Amy and Santa." Rushing over to have a look, the professor smiled to see the young lady's courage. Now that the rain and sprinklers had stopped and the raging river had subsided, the lake was fairly calm. Using Georgia and Vanitha's boat, the young teens were paddling with all their strength toward the floating house. Damien was very relieved to be rescued and quickly climbed aboard. He took Amy's board and helped Santa paddle back to dry land. When they reached the shore, the professor could hear Damien thanking the girls over and over. He gave them each a hug. We'll need another courage ceremony, Evan reflected. I'm guessing there were a number of brave tinies who helped out tonight. Yes, the professor agreed. A ceremony to celebrate courage will be in order once everything is settled back down. There is so much to clean up. Although I am pleased the fire response system works so well. Had there been a fire, it would have quenched it, Evan agreed, still shaken by the ordeal. However, we nearly lost lives because our safety system malfunctioned. That doesn't mean our safety system was faulty, the professor argued. Evan didn't reply. The professor had designed the system, and regardless of its unnecessary response to impact, if that had indeed been the cause, it did appear it would function well in a fire. We need a timer, Evan suggested. An hour or two of rain should put out any fire. Yes, a timer is required, the professor agreed wearily. His limitations and oversights were stacking up. He no longer prided himself on creating a perfect world. Walking back and forth in front of the dome, he began listing off an action plan. We will have to send everyone back to the nursery, he said. I suppose we'll have to wait until the water levels have dropped so they can walk out safely. A few hours of training should take it down. Nodding, the professor agreed. The sensors will need to be checked and replaced if necessary, he added, and everything needs an opportunity to dry out. It may take a couple of weeks to do all the repairs. As the initial shock wore off and Evan realized the tinies were going to be okay, he quietly pondered the mishaps that had occurred. This is the second time we've let the tinies down because we didn't know what was happening, he chided himself silently. Then he considered the breaking news story that he had heard on his rush journey to the biome. There was an earthquake and tsunami in California last night, he thought. But it was much worse than this. Many lives were lost. Mystified, he pondered. This is Professor Lemans' big grievance against any God notion. Catastrophes happen in our world all the time on a much larger scale. Is this because Seth's God isn't aware of what's going on? But if he's so powerful, how would he not know? Does he not care? Or does he simply choose not to intervene? And if not, why not? Suddenly, a terrible, immediate, practical realization dawned on Evan, and he spoke out loud. How will we communicate with Louis? The two scientists looked at one another. The cave was fully submerged, and so were the train tracks. Anything electrical would have to be replaced. Stroking his goatee anxiously, the professor was dismayed. I suppose we can't at the moment, he admitted. Once the water levels drop, Evan suggested, we could open the train entrance and push in a note. Odin spends a lot of time guarding the entrance, the professor nodded, observing the slowly receding water levels. I'm sure he'll notice from Mining Hill. We need them to get out as soon as possible. Some of the houses are completely waterlogged. The store and the kitchen are ruined. The outhouses overflowed, and most of the fruit trees are floating in the lake. I hope we can get the message through in the morning, perhaps. That may be possible, Evan nodded. Good thing you have all those baby animals ready for nurturing, he smiled. The timing couldn't be better. It will all work out. Yes, the professor sighed deeply. It will all work out. Chapter 31. Leaving Paradise. Amy wearily pulled on the rope that she and Damien had placed around the deer's head. Georgia was pulling on the other. The two deer had always lived furtively in the forest and weren't used to close contact, never mind ropes. Come on, she begged the frightened animals. We have to leave Paradise. I'll take the ropes, Damien offered. You girls try and coax them from behind. All the tinies were distraught, even the animals. After the dangerous flood they had survived, Ponzi had woken up everyone in the morning, saying they had to leave Paradise. Even the animals had to leave. It had taken a long time to catch the deer. If Damien hadn't found ropes and apples in Zahir Milan's house, they may never have found a way. With the girls behind them, and Damien pulling strongly in front, the deer reluctantly trotted along. Fredo stayed close to Amy's side, anxious to find his master. Santa tried to catch a rabbit, but without success. What will happen to the animals if they don't come with us? She blurted out. We can't catch them all. What about the ducks and the loons? Lily asked. No one really knew what to say. What would happen if we just decided to stay? Dia moaned. I don't see why any of us have to leave, Damien muttered. We can fix things up. I can't imagine living in the nursery again. Passing by Zahir's house, Damien called out angrily, Get up, Franz, he said. Everyone has to leave. We're heading down now. They waited impatiently for Franz. He finally emerged in a dry pair of Milan's clothes. Everything was topsy-turvy. Many of the tinies had been trapped on the other side of paradise. Those who had bravely taken the rescue boats had spent the night on Mining Hill. Damien and Franz had spent the last few hours of the darkness sleeping in Zahir Milan's house. Amy, Georgia, Santa, Dia, and Lily had been safe in their mansion on Rainbow Hill with their own dry beds and clothes. Up on the forested hill, the tinies hadn't suffered nearly as much as those in the valley. No trees had been uprooted, and the water hadn't pooled around their homes. As they reached the clearing and looked out on the rest of paradise, they were horrified. Standing on the hilltop, Amy began to cry. It's ruined, she wailed. Our beautiful world is ruined. Santa came close and put her arm around her. The deer tried to pull away to run into the forest, and the two young men did all they could to hang on. Paradise was in ruins. Water lay on the devastated gardens. Many fruit trees were uprooted and now floated in the brown lake. All the low-lying houses were bobbing up and down in the dirty water. The store, which had a foundation, had been fully submerged, and the walls were now covered in green scum. The outhouse was a mess. Only a few pillars remained upright on the remains of the school. The lower sections of the hills were scarred with deep water furrows, and mud lay everywhere. And little did any of them know that all the electronic equipment hidden in the cave under Rainbow Hill had been completely destroyed. Sadly, they began their descent. The deer bolted, pulling hard on the ropes. Damien and Franz began sliding down the hill after them. Hey! They called out as mud splattered everywhere. Girls, help! Hitting a tree, Damien was finally able to gain some leverage and take control. Franz slipped and fell, but didn't let go of his rope. Amy, Georgia, and Santa ran down, slipping and sliding on the soggy slope to help the guys. Once two tinies were holding on to each rope, they were able to control the deer. Santa saw the rabbit again and tried to catch him. Unfortunately, she tripped and fell face first in the mud. She picked herself up with dismay. Dia carefully stepped from tree to tree. Everything is so wet and gross, she cried. Lily tried to help her friend. Coming out of the forest, they could see the others across the muddy valley. Uncle Louis was slowly making his way down Mining Hill. Zahir, Odin, Lima, and Ponzi were ahead of him. Charlie and Kenzie had their arms full of chickens. Brownie and the sheep were happily following Vahid. Nancy was holding Ripple, and Tina had a rabbit in her arms. Watch out, this mud is slippery, Uncle Louis called out loudly, almost falling himself. Ponzi sat down and slid all the way to the bottom. Cheering wildly, he stood up, covered with mud. Impulsively, Zahir, Lima, and Odin did the same. Well, that's a quicker way, Damien mused, watching enviously as they sloshed across the muddy field. If there were no trees on that hill, I'd have taken a ride behind the deer. You sure swam fast last night, Georgia praised. Super fast, Amy agreed, looking proudly back over her shoulder as she helped hold the rope. We were all watching you and hoping you'd be okay. Then with an anxious expression, she added, especially when you hit that bridge. I almost wasn't okay, Damien admitted quietly, pulling hard on the rope as the deer tried to bolt. What? The two girls asked in unison, helping the boys rein in the deer. Even Franz looked up in surprise. I got pulled way down by the water, he admitted. When I came back up, I just barely made it to Uncle Louis's house. I didn't have the strength to swim to shore. With a quick smile in Amy's direction, he said, I'm awfully glad I got rescued. Helping Damien hold on to the rope, Amy swallowed hard. I'm so thankful we all survived that flood, she cried out. I couldn't bear to lose anyone else. I'm going to write a book, Georgia stated suddenly as she and Franz held tightly to the other rope. What happened to us last night is a story that everyone will want to read. Hey, that's a great idea, Damien nodded. He laughed. It would be way more interesting than Jake and Ellie go to a farm. Loving the idea, Amy suggested, and you could draw pictures, too. Franz piped up. Maybe you could also write about the hot day. George's eyes shone. When I saw the rainbow. And we first felt rain. And you will have to do the spider encounter, Amy added. You tell that story so well. Georgia was elated. We've had some very exciting adventures, she said. Freddo looked up to see Zahir standing in the orchard ruins. With a happy bark, he dashed across the mire to greet his master. He then proceeded to shake, sending muddy water in all directions. Everyone yelled and tried to get out of the way. Finally, all the tinies gathered together in the uprooted orchard. Uncle Louis was talking to the others about the nursery. Amy noticed Charlie run over to place a little stone marker next to Rose's pillar. The bedraggled Rose was still green, but Maxie had gone missing. Charlie was heartbroken. Amy felt so sad. So will we see our pets in the nursery? Milan inquired. Yes, Uncle Louis smiled. The baby animals will need lots of love and nurturing. Evan is going to put plenty of new books in the library, and he has even ordered some very special art and craft supplies. Really? Benita and Yuyan responded with delight, clapping their hands together. I'll start on my new book, Georgia exulted. I hope there will be clean, dry clothes, Benita said wistfully. Me too, Uncle Louis agreed, looking around at all the wet, bedraggled teens. I hate the nursery, Odin complained. We're all going to be crammed together again in one big, boring room. Many glaring eyes turned on Odin. Okay, he growled, throwing his hands up. I didn't know it was so easy to ruin paradise. Maybe if the... Odin, that's enough, Uncle Louis said sharply. Maybe we could help to fix paradise back up, rather than stay in the nursery, Zahir suggested eagerly. If we all pitched in, we could probably clean everything up in a few weeks. It would be kind of fun rebuilding. Damien and Kenzie agreed. I appreciate your enthusiasm, Uncle Louis acknowledged, but this disaster is beyond us. We'll rebuild our homes when we return. We have more experience now, so we can build even better ones than we did before. And we'll appreciate paradise so much more, Amy nodded. Hard to believe that a tiny pebble can create this much damage, Odin grumbled. Or maybe the professor just needs to pay better attention to what's going on, if he's even real. Ponzi placed his hands on his hips and looked up with narrowed eyes. He didn't know what was happening, did he? Evan didn't either, Odin smirked. Turning around in the devastated orchard, Uncle Louis faced the challengers. The cow mooed, the chickens cackled, and Freddo was rolling in the low-lying water. All the wet, weary tinies were looking toward him, and many eyes were full of fear. While Uncle Louis could empathize with the feelings of abandonment to a certain degree, he was not in any doubt about the professor's love or intentions. He was very loyal to the big, kind scientists he spoke to regularly on the smartphone. Yet it wasn't easy to transfer his allegiance or explain a being who preferred to remain unseen. He was well aware that his relationship had developed through continual interactions over the last 4 years, while the rest of the tinies had never met the mastermind of paradise. Somehow he had to provide a satisfactory answer to what had just happened, even though he hadn't completely worked it out in his own mind. It was an unfortunate oversight, Uncle Louis admitted slowly. I don't know why it took so long for anyone to respond, but from now on we have to realize the professor and Evan may not be paying attention all of the time. That is true. There may be more emergencies that we will face in the future where we will have to rely on our own ingenuity to stay alive, just as we've done before. Thankfully, they've equipped us with everything they could think of to protect us from danger. The lake kept us safe from the heat. The hills helped us to escape the flood. Who knows what the next emergency will be, but maybe there are other things built into paradise that will help us to survive. Some of the tinies were nodding in agreement, but Odin, Ponzi, and Franz rolled their eyes at each other and smirked in amusement. With narrowed eyes, Uncle Louis focused on the 3 scoffers and said firmly, Let's learn one lesson from this. From now on, we need to be very careful how we treat our environment. Carefulness may not protect us from every emergency, but it will avoid some. Odin kicked a muddy apple. So are you saying we can't do any more experimenting? He grumbled. Zahir frowned. You intended to cause damage, he argued. Why don't you experiment and find a way to make things better? Do you think you're Uncle Louis II? Odin retorted, but no one laughed. Despite his exhaustion, Uncle Louis mustered what strength he could, put on a brave face. "We're going to look on the positive side," he replied. "We've survived this flood. We haven't been left to clean the mess up all on our own. We have an important work to do, looking after the next group of animal babies. We will keep busy in the nursery and the time will go fast. When we return with all our new pets, paradise will be ready for us to enjoy once again." Most of the tinies cheered. When the tunnel doors opened, the farm boys led the way through the hall and toward the ramp, herding the animals ahead of them. Amy hung back, intending to be last in line. She turned for a final look at the marred ruins of paradise where they had been so happy for over 4 months.
"I love you, dear little home,"
she sang wistfully, looking up at her forested hill.
"No matter where I roam, no matter how long we're away, I'll be coming back someday. You'll be green with a pretty view. Rainbows will rise over you, and when I see you again."
Another voice joined hers, a deeper, richer voice.
"Oh no, just how lucky I am."
Turning around abruptly, she saw Zahir standing behind her. "Good ending," she said with a tearful smile. Zahir held out his mighty hand and she took it gratefully. "It won't be long," he assured her. "Come on, let's go see our new pets." I'd like to thank the following people for helping me with this recording: Amber Abel and Jacob Keane for doing the singing, and Mika Imhoff for writing the music. I would like to acknowledge some of the books that were referenced in this novel. Many helpful ideas for this series have come from the Bible and my Christadelphian fellow believers. The following books and websites have also provided scientific insights and logical arguments to counter postmodernism, evolution, and new atheism. Wonders of Creation, The Works of the Divine Designer by David Burgess. You can find this at testimonymagazine.com. Answering the New Atheism, Dismantling Dawkins' Case Against God by Scott Hahn and Benjamin Wicker. This can be found at Emmaus Road Publishing. Mama Bear Apologetics by Hilary Morgan Farrar. This can be found at Harvest House Publishers. Servant Leadership by Robert K. Greenfield at Paulus Press. Creation Ministries International. Many good articles by Dr. Robert Carter and others can be found at creation.com. Change Us Not God, Bible Meditations on the Death of Jesus by John Launchbury. This can be found at wcfoundations.org. If you would like to order The Enormous Tiny Experiment and see all the maps and pictures, you can order both this and Pain in Paradise on Amazon.